Hello everyone, this is Sam from HiPy. Last time I looked at how to install Python and get set up. Today we're going to look at the very basics of Python. This is going to be a bit of a longer video because I really want to get set up and kind of get some coding philosophies really laboured in this video. So it might be a bit boring if you kind of get the gist or get the point of it very quickly. Then I'm sorry. If you've done any programming before, then this is probably going to be a little bit slow. So I'm sorry about that. But for anyone who's new to programming or new to Python, we're really going to kind of slow it down and go really kind of step by step in this, so you fundamentally understand what programming is about. So in programming, in Python, everything is an object, which means that it has some kind of like attribute or some kind of information that's stored within it. And that might seem like a really kind of weird thing to say and a really abstract thing to say, but later on we'll see it's really important to understand that, because we can start using those attributes and manipulating them in some really clever ways. So the simplest object to look at is the integer. So if we just type in 3 on our keyboard, we just see 3, and we can just press Shift Enter here, and if we're using the Jupyter Notebook, it'll output 3. On Spider, this will work a little bit differently. If you put it in the console, it'll work. If you put it in the script editor, it won't. If you're in the script editor, instead of doing 3, you'll have to type in print 3, which will give us the same thing out, kind of, just not an output. So there's a slight difference there, which we'll talk about later. But for now, if we just type in 3, we get the output 3. So 3 is an integer, which means it's a whole number. If we want to check the type of anything, we can use the type function on whatever we have, and it'll give us what that type is. So int stands for integer, and the type function just gives us that back. So another type of object we can think about is the floating point number. So like 3.25 is a floating point because it's a decimal. So if we do this, we can get the same output again. And then if we do type 3.25, we also get a float. So there are tons and tons and tons and tons of different objects we can use, and loads of different types. And later on, when we look at classes, we'll see how to define our own, which is really crazy. Let's look at some more simple things just for now. So another type we can talk about is the string. So if we type in with speech marks or apostrophes, they're both kind of interchangeable. We can type in hello. This is what I was doing in the introduction to installing Python kind of guide, and we can see we get hello back out. Notice that if you just type in hello, you'll get an error because hello isn't actually a variable yet. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the last one I want to look at is the true and false, which are called Boolean variables. So if we type in type true, we'll see that it's a bool, and also I missed this one out. If we type in hello, we'll get a string. str stands for string. So there's the 4 main very basic object types we're going to be looking at. If we want to group these together in some way in a list, then we have to use a list, which is another object used by square brackets. So square brackets are used to do a list, and then we can put whatever in the list separated by commas. So we can put anything in a list. I'll just use the 4 examples that we had before, and we get this, and that's a list. So lists are like the first example of a data structure we're going to be looking at, because it stores data, and it's really simple. It's probably the most simple way of storing data in Python, because it's just a really nice way of doing it. So variables, we'll look at variables very quickly. A variable in Python is something that is like a label that we give to an object, which we can change and manipulate in some way. So the way that we assign objects to variables is we just use the equals sign. So if I want to assign the list above to the letter A, I can just type this line of code, which is just saying we're assigning this list to A. And whenever Python will interpret A, or whenever we type A into Python, it will immediately think of this list. So there are a lot of operations that we can do on A. In fact, all operations we can do on A, we can do on this list. So let's go into more detail about lists. Lists are indexable, which means that we can kind of pull out elements of the list by using indexes. So I'm going to use the label A to kind of save myself from typing all of this all the time. So if we do A and then square brackets 0, we get the first element of that list. So in programming in general, we start counting from 0 because it's kind of like how binary works, is zeros and ones, and there's a lot of maths behind it in terms of why we count at 0. But it's all boring. But all you need to know here is that we start counting at 0. So we can also go through the other ones. We have 1, we have 2, we have 3. If we go to 4, we'll get an error because there's no fifth element here, which is a bit annoying. But that's fine. It's kind of like an important error to watch out for because it's an error that happens a lot when you're just doing stuff with Python that you can kind of easily miss. If we want to get lists back which have 2 or more elements in, we can use the slicing. So it's denoted by a colon, and what this will do, it'll start at this number, so it'll start at the 1, and then it'll include that, and then it'll go up to but not including the other index. So this one will have the first element, which is denoted by 0, the second element, which is denoted by 1, but not the third element denoted by 2. I know that was really confusing, but just think about counting from 0, and it's really easy. We look at 0, 1, 2, we don't include 2, so we just have these 2 elements. So when we return this, we'll just see the first 2 elements. It's probably the hardest thing to get your head around in programming in general, is that we start counting at 0. It's very confusing at the start, but hopefully we can get that to work in the end. So we're also going to look at a neat trick that we can do as well. If we just type in -1, we get the last element, and then -2, we get the second last element, and so on and so on. It's quite a nice, useful trick that you can find using later. So we're just going to go straight into the worked example and basically explain it through. In Python and the reason we installed Anaconda, we wanted libraries that contain functions so that we can do things easily, and one of these libraries we're going to be looking at is the matplotlib library. So if we run this piece of code, we import the matplotlib library, we'll see that we have a load of different functions that we can then use it's basically a plotting library that can give us a nice kind of way of looking at graphs. The problem is with just this line of code is that if we wanted to plot a graph, we would have to type in matplotlib.pyplot.plot and then our functions. And then if we wanted to do anything else here, like add a title, we would have to have like add title or whatever. I don't think that's the actual piece of code, but basically what I'm trying to make the point about is that we don't want to write this every time. This is a load of text that is just going to get repetitive, and programmers are lazy and they want the computer to do things for them. So if we do import matplotlib.pyplot as plt, it means that instead of writing all of this, we can just write this, which is a really nice way of doing things. So that's going to be our first line of code in our worked example. The second line of code is we need to set up our x and y kind of variables for us to work with in graph. So for now we're just going to use a list, and we're going to go for the numbers from 0 to 10. So that's the number 0 through 10, and we can also do this by using the range function, but for now we'll just do it this way. And then for y, we'll do the square of these numbers. So if I can remember my squared numbers, which is embarrassing, but there we go. That should be all of them. We have the squared numbers. So then we have to use the function plt.plot x and y as arguments. So arguments are inputs to functions. And then if we do plt.show, it'll then show us the plot. So if we do shift and enter here, we should get eventually the graph of x versus y, or x versus x squared. So from here we could do things like add a title, add axis labels, we could change kind of the scale of the x and the y axis, but that's for a later date. For now, what I want you to get kind of involved in is just understanding the very basics of programming and how to assign variables and look at kind of the very basics. So I wouldn't get too involved in kind of the intricacies of matplotlib for now. That's probably for a later date. So I believe that the mini project for this one is also plotting data. Try and do that. If there's any problems with it, just take it slowly, work through, look at online resources, look at other online resources as well. Don't just use ours, because kind of there's so much about Python that we can't possibly cover everything, so we want you to use other resources as well, and just stick with it, because eventually it will click and it will get easy for you. So next time we'll be looking at some more kind of programming-y things like if functions, loops, everything to make your life a little bit easier. But for now, try this out, and more importantly, have fun doing it.